Hello everybody. So Subboor Ahmad did a video responding to the discussion between Dennis Noble and Richard Dawkins. I did a response video to that showing how clueless he is on the subject. Of course he ignored my video and has produced another video on Dennis Noble. Let's see if he has anything interesting to say.
So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be reacting to an interview in which he's talking about the some of the issues that he has. This is from the Institute of Art and Ideas. Why Dawkins is wrong. Okay, now we're only going to react to the part which says, why does the idea of genetic determinism have such a lasting appeal?
I think it has been a big mistake, I'll be philosophical for a moment, of dualism. See, Descartes was a dualist. He dealt with the problem of the mechanics of an organism by saying there must be a spiritual entity that interacts with the mechanics. This was Cartesian dualism. And in a sense, the dualism of the replicator being in communication with and conducting the vehicle is a resurrection of the same kind of problem.
Okay, I just want to say a few things about this. So the replicator here, he's referring to the selfish gene idea. Basically, the genes are the replicators. Okay, now the vehicle is us, the body. So he doesn't agree with this type of breakdown where essentially the causation is, sorry.
Let's see if I can explain this bit better. Dennis Noble brings up the example of mind-body dualism, a philosophy associated with Descartes, where there is a mind-body split. He tries to invoke a similar duality between the genes and the body.
He thinks that this problem of treating the replicators as something which are essentially the main determinants in evolution is highly problematic. And as we're going to go through, you guys are going to see why he thinks that's the case, and the way he breaks it down I think is very, very interesting.
Noble then explains why he doesn't believe in a mind-body dualism, then goes back to this example of the genes and the rest of the body. He says there has to be a non-determinate function. What he means by this is that what's encoded in the DNA does not guarantee how the organism develops or what it becomes, and that there are other factors at play.
Because obviously it has to have some degree of non-determinate function.
Okay, now this is a very important point. There has to be a degree of a non-determinate function, because if it was purely determinate, then we would all be the same, right? We would all act in the same way. You would have no novelty, no creativity, no geniuses.
This is the first of Subboor's errors. Firstly, nobody is saying that the genes have total control on the rest of the body, but even if that were the case, that would not mean that we are all the same, as we all have different DNA. What it would mean would be that we would be exactly what our DNA encodes without the effect of any other mechanism.
So there has to be some level of indeterminacy even within the Darwinian worldview.
Again, there was never any doubt that there was some indeterminate factors, such as lifestyle and therapeutic interventions, that interplay with inherited biological factors. Even the supporters of the gene theory of evolution never doubted this. This is where Subboor has misunderstood Dennis Noble, and I will explain now. This can be a bit technical to explain. I do need to put my medical doctor hat on at times, but I will try to make this as easy to understand as possible. This is the key to understand. Look at the direction of the arrows. DNA is transcribed into messenger RNA, which is translated into protein. Let's go back to this picture. We can see how environmental factors also have an effect on our bodies, so it's not just our genes. For example, let's look at type 2 diabetes. Here are some genes that are associated with type 2 diabetes. Not everybody who has these genes will develop type 2 diabetes, and not everybody with type 2 diabetes will have these genes. The people who do have these genes are more likely to develop type 2 diabetes. Other risk factors, besides which genes people have, include environment factors, such as poor diet and being inactive. The very important point that I want to make is that having certain genes does not guarantee developing a particular body, as there are environmental factors as well. Those environmental factors do not affect the underlying genes, so somebody who has an active and healthy lifestyle will reduce their chances of getting diabetes, but they will still have the genes that make them more likely to have diabetes, and those genes would still be passed on to their offspring, regardless of whatever lifestyle or other environmental factors are present. In summary, when we look back at this slide, the direction of the arrow is only one way. It does not go the other way as well. This is somewhere I think Subboor has completely misunderstood. If you'd like me to explain any part of this again, please post in the comments section.
But he's going to make some very interesting points now about the way that Darwinists understand this stochastic input and the way that he does.
Otherwise, it would be determinate. So what we're talking about is, can there be innovation? Can there be creativity? That's the key question. Now, the Darwinian, or rather the neo-Darwinian answer to that is, well, there is chance, there is stochasticity, but it's not used. It is just simply determining how many breakages, how many changes occur naturally in the genome. And
okay, so that's a bit of a long-winded way of him basically saying Darwinists believe in random mutations. Random because they're essentially copying errors, these changes, which are then selected or selected out based upon their reproductive advantage or lack of. But in a very simple layman terms, all he's saying is Darwinists accept randomness in terms of the copying errors that you get, the changes that you get, that's the indeterminate component of the overall neo-Darwinian paradigm.
Then natural selection comes along and automatically works out which are successful and which are not. And I accept that. Obviously, if that is the way things happen, that's fine.
There is this indeterminate part where there are copying errors as described, leading to variation, but there are also the environmental factors that I described earlier. Randomness in science means that which cannot be accurately predicted. So there is randomness creating variation on which natural selection acts. Subboor stated in this video that he accepts this as a process, but it does not adequately explain the entirety and diversity of life, without actually explaining why this mechanism is insufficient.
But in addition to that process, organisms can actually go and use the chance. And they're doing that all the time. See, the way our immune systems work shows that.
Before he goes into the example of the immune system, I just want to read the comments and see if you guys got that. Do you guys understand why what he's saying is revolutionary? He's essentially saying that the organism actively uses chance for its own benefit.
None of this is revolutionary. This is already well known. Let's look at the immune system and address both points from Noble and Subboor. One part of the immune system is the adaptive immune system. This deals with new threats. There is hypermutation and the favourable mutations are selected. The mutations are retained in the immune cells as a memory in case the pathogen is encountered again. This is how vaccines work. The mutations are not transmitted to the offspring.
What it does is to try to find out whether it's got a sequence that already can latch onto that virus or that bacterium, in which case it just multiplies those cells. So it's got the feedback there already if it already exists. If it doesn't, it does something quite fascinating. It goes to the nucleus and says, please stop the error correction and allow the breaks to occur.
Whoa. Think about what he's saying there. There is a communication that's done to the nucleus to tell it, don't have this self-correction, right? Don't have this self-correction. Let the breakages happen.
Why are you acting all surprised? This is already well known.
And then we will select out of those the very few that can grab hold of this new virus. That's how the immune system works.
Whoa. Do you see how the immune system is working in a way that's totally against neo-Darwinism's predictions?
This isn't against neo-Darwinian predictions. A fitness-enhancing, functioning immune system would be selected for by natural selection. Let's see if he explains further.
So here we have an organism directly communicating with its own nucleus so that the stochastic process of randomness of these changes and this chance non-determinant element is used to try and facilitate the organism's goal.
The organism's goal, if you wish to use teleological terms, is to survive. There is no conscious control or choice involved here. The mechanism is subconscious. The adaptations are not passed on to the offspring.
I'm trying to find very simple ways of putting it. Rather than a bottom-up approach, it's also a top-down approach. It's not just that you have one-way communication. You actually have communication downwards. And this point is so significant. And the way that Dennis Noble is obviously explaining it, he's explained it many, many times. It seems very, very simple, but it's literally earth-shattering in the field of evolutionary biology.
This isn't earth-shattering in any way. We already know how memory is retained in the immune system. It is not transmitted to the germline. If we go back to this slide, the direction of the arrows is still only one way. There is a possible Lamarckian element if this adaptive immunity is passed on. This is still hypothetical and lacks sufficient evidence. Even if this were true, this would still be another mechanism of evolution and would not disprove or discredit neo-Darwinism.
This is a paradigm shift. This is a significant change in the way that biologists are going to be looking at the self-gene perspective and holism, and the whole systems biology idea, you can see, is going to skyrocket. It's going to skyrocket if these ideas are going to be accepted by the majority of scientists.
This will only happen when there is sufficient evidence from research that demonstrates this. This is not the case at the moment.
Now, what I'm saying is that's general. It happens in bacteria when they resist antibiotics. It happens in cancers where they resist radiotherapy and chemotherapy. What do? They also hypermutate. They use chance to get novelty.
Can you see the anthropological language being used here?
Subboor is confused here regarding terminology. He is saying anthropological, which is related to the study of mankind, when he instead should be using anthropomorphic, which means giving human traits to non-human things.
Can you see that the cancer is actively using the process of randomness to defend itself? So now we have a top-down approach, not bottom-up approach. So the central dogma, which is the idea that it's all reductive, going from the genes all the way up, a one-way communication, that is patently false.
By now it should be clear just how wrong he is. I hope I've demonstrated that although there are changes to the DNA of the immune cells, They are not passed to the offspring, so it's not a top-down process as he says. Even if this were proved to be a mechanism, it wouldn't mean that the gene-centered view is wrong, as multiple mechanisms can coexist.
He's proposing the exact opposite of the selfish gene perspective. This is not genes determining behavior and morphology. This is the organism itself having communication with its own nucleus and to use chance to come up with answers for its problems that it's trying to solve, whether the problem is surviving radiotherapy or something else.
I hope by now you can see that although these changes have long been known to occur, the current discussion is whether they are inherited, and the evidence suggests that they are not. The next part of the video discusses the background behind these issues.
Noble he was the supervisor of Dawkins.
This bit is wrong. Dawkins' doctoral supervisor was Nicolaas Tinbergen, a Nobel Prize-winning biologist. Dennis Noble was just an examiner for Richard Dawkins.
He's brilliant in terms of his thinking and his articulation and the papers that he's written. However, no one knows Noble, let's be frank, compared to Dawkins, even though Noble is higher academically.
How did you determine that? Both of them were Oxford biology professors. He seems to show a reverence to Noble, probably because he wants to denigrate Dawkins for his atheism activism. Subboor's reverence to Noble is similar to Hamza's for Stephen Meyer.
But watch this breakdown of where Dawkins is compared to where science actually is currently.
But I don't think the great majority of research biologists are any longer following that path in the way in which he laid it out. So
basically what he's saying is Richard Dawkins is completely out of date.
This, of course, needs to be put into the context of the rivalry between the different views of the two Oxford professors. I will now play a segment from another video of mine which also featured Dennis Noble. Let's look into Dennis Noble's background and see what other evolutionary biologists think. Jerry Coyne states that Noble's assertions are deeply misguided or flat wrong. Lawrence Moran and other evolutionary biologists have criticized Noble for his lack of knowledge and unscientific stance on evolution. I will link these into the description. Both Dawkins and Noble are in their 80s. Let's see what younger evolutionary biologists and educators think. For example, there is Forrest Valkai, Jackson Wheat, John Perry of State It Clearly, and Dr. Dan Stern-Cardinal of Creation Myths. Their output reflects the gene-centered view of evolution and not the epigenetic Lamarckian view of Noble.
Okay. I think there's a lot there. Firstly, let's break it down into the most important and going down in terms of importance. The very first thing that this does is it gives us an example of the problem of induction, the problem of underdetermination, the problem of unconceived alternatives, the problem of theory ladenness. It is a prime example of many issues in the philosophy of science which we've been speaking about. So that's the first thing.
So your contention is that this demonstrates that science is not absolute and can change. This isn't a surprise to anybody, as this is how science works.
The second thing is, it is actually a challenge to neo-Darwinism, and neo-Darwinism in terms of its mechanism, because that is clearly quite naturalistic. Now, this mechanism that systems biology is pushing, Noble is pushing, natural genetic engineering, it fits nicer with intelligent design than the selfish gene perspective.
And intelligent design is just repackaged creationism, so has no role in a science discussion.
Although the selfish gene perspective, I'm not saying, you couldn't try and fit some sort of design implications into it, but this perspective has much bigger implications. So those are two off the top of my head. I'm sure there's more. I mean, the third is obvious. Richard Dawkins is supposed to be some great orator, some great representative of biology, and he's been pushing out atheism and pushing out, his scientific credentials, and he's being thoroughly discredited through this debate. I think that's important. That's significant. That's significant from a sociological point of view when it comes to the new atheism movement.
Are you implying an ulterior motive here, Subboor, and that you're not just interested in the science? Surely not. This was a rather technical video, and it was caused by Dennis Noble mischaracterizing Richard Dawkins' position and Subboor Ahmad not understanding what Noble is saying. I have tried to unravel both and explain it as coherently as I could. Before I finish, I think it is worth looking at some of the comments on the original video of Dennis Noble, where it is clear that the viewers do not think Noble is accurately representing Dawkins. This viewer doesn't think that Noble's video necessarily contradicts what Dawkins' thesis was, and that Dawkins was strawmanned. This viewer seems to agree that Dawkins never spoke of strict genetic determinism. Thank you for watching, and please let me know what you think in the comments section.